Welcome. I'm Susan Sheridan Tucker, Executive Director of the League of Women Voters Minnesota. And today's program will be focusing on caucusing in Minnesota. Every 2 years, Minnesotans come together to cast their preference for candidates and offer up resolutions that can be carried to each party's convention for adoption to their official party platforms. This year, with an open presidential seat and more attention being drawn on caucuses and primaries, our goal today is to provide the information that you'll need to caucus in your own neighborhood on March 1st, 7 p.m. But before we get too much into the details, I'd like to introduce our two guests, representatives from Minnesota's two major political parties, the DFL and the Republican Party, who will offer more details about how each of their parties approach caucusing. To my left is Vicki Wright, who has served on the DFL State Executive Committee and its Budget and Operations Subcommittee, in addition to 5 years as Constitution Commission co-chair. In her local suburban Senate district, she's been the party unit's communication director and treasurer, as well as recently completing 3 terms as chair. Outside the DFL, Vicki has made a career in marketing communications as a writer and creative director. Vicki was the DFL's part-time training director for 3 years before being named its full-time director in 2015. Welcome, Vicki.
Thank you.
And to my right is Kathy Tingelstad, a Republican, is a former member of the Minnesota House of Representatives who served in District 49B, which primarily serves Andover and Coon Rapids. While serving as a state legislator, Tingelstad was the trainer of all of the newly elected legislators for 10 years. Kathy was first elected in 1996 and served until 2008. While in the House, she served as chair of the Governmental Operations and Veterans Affairs Committee and was a member of the Capital Investment, Environment and Natural Resources, Health and Human Services, Redistricting, and Rules and Legislative Administration Committees. Quite a few committees. Kathy also served as a member of the board for the Anoka-Hennepin School District, where she served from 2009 to 2012. She has a background in marketing communications and currently works as a business consultant. Kathy is also a 25-year member of the League of Women Voters, and within her local Republican Party, she has held several leadership positions and currently trains all of the Republican Precinct Caucus conveners in her area. So welcome, Kathy.
Great, thank you.
So thank you both for joining us today. And Vicki, I'll start with you. This year we've been hearing a lot about the Iowa caucuses. Briefly provide us an interview or an overview of what the Minnesota caucuses are and why do we use the caucus system and not a primary system?
Well, I think that as far as why we use it, it's because there's a statute that tells us we have a caucus system instead of a primary system. But I think the reason we have it is because it's the best possible way to organize the grassroots. The thing about Minnesota, no matter what party you're affiliated with, is we build our party from the bottom up. And that, I think, is helpful in really turning out the vote and keeping people engaged, making them understand that they can literally be part of the process just by raising their hand and getting involved. And I think caucuses demonstrate that. The vote that we take for the presidential preference helps establish how many delegates will be going to the National Convention, but it's not the primary reason we caucus.
Great, thank you. And Kathy, why don't you remind the audience when precinct caucuses will be held, and what's the best way for them to figure out where they should show up?
Sure. Well, basically it's Tuesday, March 1st, 2016. Begins at 7 o'clock at night, and we expect a large turnout, so we're encouraging people to come, 6:30, quarter to 7, but it officially begins at 7 o'clock. And as far as where they can find out more about it, it's on the Secretary of State's website. Mm-hmm. And I tell people it's usually not where you vote in a regular election. It could be, but typically it's at a school or community center, so it's different typically than the location where you vote each year.
So people really should check twice before
Yes.
going out. Okay, thank
Exactly.
you. And we know that the parties handle caucuses a little differently. So can you describe the Republican process?
Sure. Well, basically this year there's going to be a presidential straw poll, which will be binding at the national level. And this is the first time that that's happened in recent memory for the Republicans. So that will be a little bit different. But as far as the whole process, you know, it's election of officers, election of delegates and alternates to the next convention, and then resolutions looking at the state party platform.
Okay, great. And how does it differ at the Democratic Party?
Well, it sounds very much the same, actually, especially because they'll be doing the vote to establish the delegations that'll go to the national convention. We take votes on our precinct caucus, precinct officers for the 2-year cycle, as well as people who will be delegates to the next level at the organizing unit convention. Yes.
And will you do a straw vote as well? That will
It's
be
called.
binding?
We call it the presidential preference ballot.
Okay.
And it is. When we say binding, it means that yes, there's a certain percentage then that will be established of all of our delegates who will go. That will be assigned to each of the candidates who receive at least 15% of the vote.
Okay. And Kathy, tell us, who can participate in a caucus? Can anybody just show up?
Sure.
And do you have to declare party affiliation?
Right, yeah. Well, we encourage everyone to show up. If you're over 18, you can participate. If you're under 18, as far as by the election date in November, then you could come as an observer. And actually, we need observers to help with running the caucus as far as some of the things with being a teller and some of those aspects of the caucus. But we really encourage everyone to come, and obviously that evening you need to decide which party you are. But we welcome everyone, and you know, as part of the Republican part of the caucus, there are certain things where we say, you know, you should generally agree with the party platform, you should generally vote for Republicans in the last election or intend to in the next election. So there's certain basic things as far as what's considered being a Republican for that night.
Okay. And Vicki, what about non-citizens? Would you encourage non-citizens to come to caucus as an observer?
I would say definitely as an observer or guest. I think it's a wonderful introduction to the democratic process. We too also have a registration process whereby when you sign in and provide your address, you are affirming that you are will be eligible to vote in the November 8th election, and that you are a resident of that precinct, and that you are also, you consider yourself a member of the DFL party, and you're not an active member of any other party, because if someone were to switch over, we would welcome that as well, as long as they understand that they are now saying, okay, I'm not an active member of any other party, that's fine with us. And then, so as they sign in, we affirm that, they are affirming that. There's another process then for guests to sign in. All of our meetings in the DFL are open, okay. So people could come and observe, and we would welcome them for that purpose. But we would keep them separate from those who are voting in the caucus and so on. The other thing, too, that's slightly different from what Kathy described is that we allow 16-year-olds to participate. They are not allowed to do any voting. But they can be involved in presenting resolutions. Okay. They can even run for a precinct office. If they wanted to be chair or vice chair in the precinct, they could do that. So all of those things are available to 16-year-olds, and we get quite a few people who are sent by their high school social studies teachers or whatever to get a little extra credit, and that's really fun for us too. Yeah.
Good to engage them early.
It's really great. It's great. Yes, and I think this year there'll be a lot of interest in that too.
Terrific.
Yeah.
So before we get too deep into the details of caucusing, to shed a little humor on this, we found a video produced by the LA Times explaining how the Iowa caucus works through the perspective of a gummy bear. So let's take a look at that.
You should join Hamburger because we're tastier and we have more experience.
Join kale salad. It might seem like a fad, but it's the healthier option for America.
So the video we just played focused on the Democratic Iowa caucus process. Is it the same?
No. Well, actually, what's interesting about it is we do have a thing called walking sub-caucuses.
Okay.
And that can be used at various, it might happen at your local caucus, depending on how many people want to run for delegate. It's not how we choose our presidential preference,
Okay.
which is dramatically different from Iowa. Like I say, we do that with an actual ballot that once you register, you fill it out and you put it in the ballot box. So that part of it is entirely separate.
And private.
And private, exactly. The walking sub-caucus might occur if there were many more people who wanted to run for delegate than there were delegate slots to be elected. And they might then use proportional voting, which is the more formal term for walking sub-caucus, where you divide up according to various issues as well as candidates to be selected to be a delegate to the next process. So I was in Iowa, in fact, and got to witness it. It was very interesting, and quite different from what we do.
Yeah. And do the Republicans do that at all?
No, we traditionally have not done that. It's always been secret ballot. And this year it's quite a bit different because the presidential poll is binding. So we have a lot of ballot security issues that we want to make sure and follow this year.
That's for sure.
And how much time should people allot for attending caucus? Because you're not just coming in to vote, correct?
Right.
Well, you can, though, in the Democratic side.
Okay.
You can come, register, and you get your ballot upon registration.
Okay.
And then you can vote, and you can leave if you need to or choose to. Of course, we want people to stay, and we're hoping that they feel welcome to stay. But depending, with this year being so intense and so many candidates and so much enthusiasm going on, we expect large crowds. And so it may be that a lot of people will just come and vote and leave. But they do have that option. And as far as how long it takes, if you do choose to be part of the caucus session, I would say on average about 2 hours.
Okay.
But if you're in a place where there are 600 people at your caucus, it might take longer. If you are in a rural area where 20 people show up, it might be less time. But the voting will continue till 8 p.m. So most caucuses will last beyond an hour.
Okay.
For sure.
But the voting ends at 8.
It ends at 8 unless there are people still in line ready to register. Just like when you go to the polls, if you are still in line when the polls are scheduled to close, you are still able to come in and vote, and it'll be the same thing for our preference ballot.
Okay. And does the process at all get held up if the lines are very long, or is the caucus
Well, the
going
caucus
on?
will go on,
Okay.
yes. So we would encourage people to come early, as Kathy said. Our registration is scheduled to open by 6:30. It must open at 6:30. We are encouraging people that are expecting a big turnout to open sooner,
Okay.
so that they can start processing registrations and balloting sooner.
Okay. And is that a similar process in terms of the poll being open till 8 o'clock for the vote? Can you just cast a vote and leave, or are you expected to stay?
Well, our presidential straw ballot this year is like the second item on the agenda after officially electing the officers for the precinct to run the caucus and for the next 2 years. And so basically, we're encouraging people to stay for that first hour for sure. And, some of the larger caucuses might go till 8:30 or 9 o'clock. But basically, it is different from a regular voting at an election, so you can't really come in, vote, and leave, because it's not the first thing on the agenda. And so this year, what will happen as people register is that they will get a voting card showing that they've registered and they're qualified then to cast a vote later on in the meeting when it gets to that agenda item about the presidential poll. They'll exchange that voting card, and some precincts are going to do a voting sticker with their name tag, but they need to have some kind of identification saying that they've signed in, they're qualified in that precinct, and then they get a voting card for the presidential poll, which then they're able to ballot, with a secret ballot and turn that in.
Okay.
And then if I could just add too, I know that the State Republican Party wants to get that data from each precinct, each area, by about 8:30 or so to process it statewide and definitely have that for the 10 o'clock news on Tuesday, March 1st.
Are you using any special apps, computer apps, to get that information?
Well, somewhat. I know that there's a lot of spreadsheets.
Yeah.
In our area. We have 28 precincts, and so we have one person that's going to put that all on a sheet and email it into the state party, and I think that's fairly common around the state.
Okay, great. And so both of you have mentioned, the volunteers and what it takes to facilitate a caucus. So how does that work? How does someone get selected to participate as a leader in the caucus and then eventually become a delegate? Why don't you start, Kathy?
Yeah.
With
Well, basically show up that night.
yeah, that helps.
Although you can be elected a delegate without being there that night. Sometimes people are out of town, so
Yeah.
one of your neighbors could submit your name for delegate. But to be an officer, actually a convener, you should have been up to the training in February. But we do make it accessible so that if somebody wants to run the caucus that night, we hand them the script. As long as their people in their precinct elect them to be the caucus convener that night, they can actually do that. But to be a precinct officer is a 2-year commitment, and it's a great way to be involved in the party, get to know the local legislators and other people. So it's basically show up, have an interest. I started when I was 18, and so, it's...
So no special qualifications,
Exactly.
just a passion and an interest.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a
Okay.
great way to be involved.
Great. And
Very similar, yes. And I think that Kathy's absolutely right. The people who convene the caucuses have to have training. They have to know what the procedures are and so on. But then the process is identical, where the caucus will elect a chair, who's the official person running the caucus. Frequently that is the convener, but it isn't always so. And so typically then the convener then kind of acts as a coach as necessary. But as Kathy said, also in the DFL we have a script that any caucus chair can follow and go through the process step by step, and they can just simply read what's on the sheet and they'll be okay. And then typically there's always somebody there who knows a little bit about what's going on as well, and I find the caucuses are a pretty friendly kind of experience as long as you're willing to ask questions and because it can be confusing if you're new to it, but people generally want to answer questions and are anxious to have new people arrive. So I would encourage anyone who's a brand new attendee to really engage and get to know the people around them and stop the proceedings with a question if they are confused, because it'll help everyone. There's always a few people who want to ask questions and don't.
Right.
So if someone has the courage to ask it, it's always a good thing.
well, this year being a presidential election, clearly we're focused very much on those offices.
Very much, yes.
But are there other offices represented at the state level and local level that appear in the caucus?
Absolutely, especially because this year we'll be electing the entire legislature in Minnesota. So all of the candidates who will be seeking House and Senate seats at the local level certainly will be at caucuses in their district. And so this is a wonderful opportunity, especially for new people, to meet the candidates. I think it's the best thing about Minnesota is how easy it is to meet candidates at every level. I came here from Michigan, although I'm a Chicago born and bred native, but I was so surprised that I met my congressman the first time I went into an office to stuff envelopes. And I was bowled over. This doesn't happen in a lot of other places.
Right.
We take that for granted here. And so I think that the idea that you can engage with the elected officials and those seeking election is one of the most attractive things about our process.
So then we can expect to see candidates at the caucus. Will they make a personal pitch for themselves? Do they have representatives because they obviously can't be in every room, So how does that work?
Sure, yep. They try to get personally to every precinct, but obviously that's not possible, so they do have people who would perhaps read a letter from them or have some literature about their results, what they've been doing in elected office, or a campaign brochure. So especially at the congressional level, you know, those people can't get to every caucus, so maybe they have a video or something, you know, some type of handout where they want to basically introduce themselves to those potential voters and let them know that they are the Republican candidate.
Okay, great. Now, delegates are selected. What happens then after you become a delegate that night? Or what's the time commitment going forward? Do you just show up at the state convention as a delegate?
Actually, it wouldn't be the state convention. It would be the organizing unit convention. So in the metropolitan area, typically we're organized by Senate district. So it would be your Senate district convention. So it would be all the precincts in that Senate district who would then come together to endorse their House candidates as well as their Senate candidate. And then elect their Senate district officers, examine their constitution for their local unit, as well as then consider the resolutions, which we haven't had a chance to talk about yet.
We'll get to that.
But that's all voted on at the convention. That's typically a full day on a Saturday, usually a weekend, usually a Saturday. So it would be within a month or so of the caucuses. We have a window in which people in the local units can schedule their conventions. So I don't have it in my head exactly. I think it's about a 4 or 5 week window that the local units have right now in order to hold their conventions.
Okay.
And then they elect more delegates who go to the state convention and also their congressional district convention. So the same people go to the next 2 conventions once they're elected.
So there is a bit of a commitment
On
once
that,
you become.
yes, when you're a local unit, local party unit delegate, it's one day. It's one convention day. If you get elected to the next level, you'll go to 2 conventions, congressional district and state convention. This year, our state convention is only going to be one day. So it's not a huge time commitment, but it's really fun, really exciting.
It's good to know, though, what you know what's expected.
Yes.
And what about on the Republican side?
Sure.
Similar?
Very similar to what Vicki was saying, and a lot of times, like you said, Senate district areas are the organizing unit, and sometimes in rural areas it's the whole county. But people go to that one-day convention, and then there is where they elect people to the congressional and state convention. And it's interesting, when I did a training for conveners last week, one of the guys had mentioned that somebody he sat next to at the precinct caucus level was a first-time person. He nominated her to be a delegate. Well, she ended up going to the state convention and onto the national convention. That was her first time.
Wow.
She started at the precinct level, actually went to the national convention. So it can be done.
Yeah. Exciting.
That's great. So we've kind of talked a little bit, mentioned resolutions. So let's talk more fully about what the purpose of the resolution is and what's the process. Can anyone bring a resolution forward? Is there a specific format they need to follow? Is it something they do ahead of caucus or when they're...
A lot of those things. They do a lot of those things. On the DFL side, we do have a form that is used for all resolutions. You choose the category in which it falls, if it's environment or education or national defense or whatever the category might be. You select that. You put your name on it and your phone number in case we need to contact you about it for any reason. And then the resolution is written on there. It's presented to the caucus. The caucus has, at that point, decided how much time they're going to discuss each resolution. That's part of their rules vote that they do at the very beginning to determine, are we going to talk about this for a minute or two, or what are we going to do? And then the caucus votes on it. On that form, it is recorded whether it passed or failed. Okay. And all of those forms are then gathered and turned into the resolutions committee at of the organizing unit. They then consider they pull it all together. Sometimes they're the same resolutions because an organization might want to present the same resolution at multiple precincts and in multiple districts around the state as well. This happens very frequently, and actually it increases the likelihood that that resolution will make it to the state convention for a final vote. What ends up happening is that once the resolutions are gathered at organizing unit level and voted on at that convention, a limited number can go forward to our platform committee. Our platform committee then assembles the resolution ballot that will then be considered the state convention. So all the state delegates vote on which of these initiatives will be ultimately part of our platform. So that's the process. And somebody just recently told me a really interesting story that the Peace Corps started as a resolution here in Minnesota at a caucus.
Really?
Yes, back in the
interesting.
60s, someone put this idea forward, and it caught the attention of President Kennedy and his administration, and they decided they would take it and actually make this happen. So it's very exciting to see that is the kind of thing that is a real possibility. Genuine grassroots influence.
Right. And what about in the Republican Party?
Very similar. Ideally, they use a form, but we've seen resolutions where people just bring in a piece of paper. They basically need their name on it and phone number if they need to be contacted at the next level, and then it needs to reflect if it passed that precinct or not. So as Vicki was saying, that would go on to the next level convention and eventually perhaps be in the state party platform.
Okay, terrific. Well, just for full disclosure, the League does create its own caucus resolutions, which are posted on our website. So if anybody's interested, they could go to our website and see the resolutions that many of our members will be bringing to caucus.
Super.
So you both have been very involved in the political system, and we know that Minnesotans are pretty good about turning out for voting, especially presidential voting, but not so great when it comes to caucuses. So what can we do to attract people to attend caucus? Any thoughts?
Oh, well, yes. Yes, lots of thoughts. And that is that we look at all the media available to us. So we're using social media. We are also doing telephone robocalls to past caucus goers to remind them of where their caucus is and how important it is. We're also sending out postcards from the state level to a very large audience, and then all the local units do press releases to their local newspapers and so on. Many of them run ads, and quite a few are also doing their own postcard initiatives. And so we expect that people will get a lot of information about where their caucus is and why it's important.
Okay.
We think this is a really vitally important process, and we're proud of it in Minnesota. So we want to spread the word.
What are the Republicans doing to encourage?
Basically the same thing, a lot of email outreach.
Okay.
We're talking to people through their faith-based organizations,
Okay.
and a lot of networking and talking to your friends, but it is really important to go. I know it's difficult sometimes on a Tuesday night for people, but you know, if you just look at it one night a year to make that commitment, you know, it is really important.
And any activity on the campuses?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
extensive,
good, 'cause we certainly
extensive
wanna
activity, yes.
Reach out to the newest voters.
That's right.
Great. Well, so for those of you in the audience who've never been to a caucus, we would certainly recommend that you try to attend. It probably is the most direct, hands-on experience that a voter can have in deciding who's going to run for office and what issues get represented on a party's platform. So we really would encourage that. And I'd also like to just draw attention to a program that will be on February 25th from noon to 1:30 at the Neighborhood House. Secretary of State Steve Simon will be presenting his 2016 State of the State of Elections address. And he'll be talking about how people can get more civically engaged in the election process. Along with his statement will be 2 workshops, one on caucuses and the other on attracting new participants as election judges. So if you have the time and availability to go on the 25th, we would strongly recommend attending that. And you can get more information on the Secretary of State's website or the League's website. And so we invite you to look further at those details. And just in general, we would say that the Secretary of State's website is an excellent resource for finding out everything related to the elections. You can find your polling place, you can register to vote online, and when the time comes, you can seek your absentee ballot. So this concludes our program for today, and really want to thank you both for helping us work through what a caucus is, and we hope that many of you will play your part in strengthening our democracy and showing up at your precinct caucus. Thank you.
Great.